I just bought the Canon R5 Mark II, and I'm coming from the Canon R6. Now the video settings on the R6 Mark II look like this, whereas the video settings on the R5 Mark II look like this. There's 3 pages of options and a whole new menu for video formats. This is something that the R6 Mark II and a lot of other Canon's hybrid cameras just don't have. And if you're coming from one of these other Canon cameras, then these settings can be a little bit overwhelming. So the purpose of this video is to explain what each of these things means and then give you a few different options for how you should set it up depending on what you're doing. The first thing we need to do is go over what everything actually means. Because yes, I could just give you the settings and say, do this, and you could just copy my settings, fine. And if that's what you want, skip to that part of the video. It's all good with me. But ideally, you should know what all these things do so that you can make informed decisions for yourself. The first thing we need to talk about is the recording format. So you're gonna make sure your camera is in video mode. If you're in photo mode, you won't get these options. And you're gonna go to the first page of the red menu. The first thing we're gonna do is go into the main recording format. Now the format you choose actually can make a huge impact in the final quality of your video file, but also the file sizes and how easily your computer can play back these files. First is RAW. RAW is exactly what it sounds like. It's just like raw photos. It's raw 12-bit video straight out of the camera, unprocessed, with all of its information in all its glory. This allows you to fully change your white balance and ISO in post-production, but the file sizes are going to be massive because nothing is compressed and you're shooting in 8K. Then we have all these acronyms below that. And if you're anything like me, these are the ones you're gonna be using. So let's break it down into chunks. The first chunk, you have XF, HEVC, S, and XF, AVC, S. HEVC is high efficiency video coding, and that basically just means it's compressing your file into a much smaller file size. But it does that by sacrificing playability. The more compressed a file is, generally the harder it is for a computer to be able to play that file back when you're editing. So HEVC is good if you want to get the most out of your storage, but you're most likely going to need to make proxies when you're editing because your computer, unless it's really powerful, won't be able to play back these files very smoothly. AVCS is a codec made for video editing specifically. It's less compressed though, so your file sizes will be larger. The next part is YCC 420 and YCC 422. This part of the setting is going to determine how your camera samples colors. 422 is going to retain more color information, allowing you to push your color grade further. So if you know you're going to be color grading your footage, 422 all the way. If you can shoot 422, I'd always recommend it. And then the last chunk is 8-bit or 10-bit. Bit depth refers to the amount of colors that are being saved into your video. 8-bit can display up to about 16 million colors, while 10-bit can display about 1 billion colors. So big difference. You only want to select 8-bit footage if you know you're never going to be color grading or editing your footage at all. 10-bit is absolutely the way to go if you have that option, which we do. And that's all our formats. So now into the actual settings. You can access this either on the quick selection menu on the video recording screen or in your red menu, but we're gonna go in here under movie recording size. You can see we have 3 tabs. Let's get into it. Now, depending on which format you choose, there's gonna be different options here, and some of them will be grayed out and some of them won't work. The really nice thing that the Canon cameras do is as we change the settings, you can see at the top part of the screen exactly what your resolution is gonna be, your frame rate, how many megabits per second that specific format is going to use, and exactly how much recording time you get out of the card that you currently have in here. So as we change our settings, we're just going to keep an eye on these things to see how it affects things. Keeping in mind, a higher megabits per second is going to mean less recording time and larger file sizes, but it also usually means a higher quality file. All right, so on the resolution screen, the first thing you have is 4K-U and 4K-D are your 2 main options here. They're both 4K. 4K-D is just a slightly wider aspect ratio. 4K-U is the standard 16:9, so if you're just shooting regular video, that's the one to go for. And same with 2K-D and Full HD. Full HD is just a standard 16:9, 1920 by 1080 standard screen that everyone's used to. And then other than the U and D options, you'll also see 4K Fine and 4K regular. 4K Fine is just 8K oversampled, so it's going to be a little bit sharper than regular 4K. However, 4K Fine limits your frames per second. So if you want 60 frames per second, you can't do 4K Fine. For now, I'm gonna go with 4K-U, and we're gonna go to the next screen, which is our frame rate. Now this one is probably the most self-explanatory option here. Now your frame rate's gonna depend on your specific project and what your final format's gonna be. Personally, for things like YouTube videos, any kind of thing where I don't need to slow down the footage at all, I'm always shooting in 24 frames per second or 23.98. Now you also have 120 frames per second here, but this is kind of a weird mode where it's gonna slow down the footage automatically for you, and it's gonna output a 30 frames per second final video that's already slowed down. So definitely don't choose that one unless you absolutely only are gonna use it for slow-mo. So we're going with 23.98p. All right, on the last screen, we have our compression formats. Now here you'll see 3 different types of intra, and you'll see LGOP. Now if you only see the LGOP option, that means you are shooting in the HEVC format back in that menu we talked about earlier. If you're in HEVC, You only get long GOP. If you switch to AVC, then you get all these options. So basically, long GOP is a form of image compression. It stands for long group of pictures. And the idea is when it's saving your file, it's combining multiple frames into one group of pictures. And this allows you to have a smaller file size while also losing a little bit of the fidelity in the image. And then you have light, normal, and high intra. Now, intra frame doesn't do this. It saves each frame individually as its own frame, and that's going to take up a lot more file space. As you can see, the megabits per second here, long GOP says 150 megabytes per second right now with the settings I currently have. If I go to intra standard, it goes up to 360, so more than double the megabits per second. For most things, long GOP is perfectly fine. Like for YouTube videos, I'm totally fine with long GOP. If you're doing a larger project where the really crisp shots are a lot more important, then I would say go with intra. There are people a lot more knowledgeable than me in this area that could probably dive into this for an hour and explain all the details between these different compression formats. But basically what you need to know is long GOP is going to save you space at the cost of a little bit of image quality, and intra is going to be the best image quality, but you're going to need a lot more storage. And the last thing I'm going to go over with you is picture profiles. I'm just going to go over this briefly because this could be an entire video on its own, but I'll just cover the basics. This can be found on the fourth screen of the red menu, and we're going to click on the first one here into custom picture. Now, there's a lot going on here. I'm only going to talk about the three main options that I think you need to concern yourself with. If you want to learn about the other ones in more detail, you can go do that research because this is a whole rabbit hole we're getting into. But the three main ones you need to know about are Rec 709, C-Log 2, and C-Log 3. Now, Rec 709 is just the standard color space that videos are delivered in. Now, log, and specifically C-Log, is a logarithmic way of interpreting light instead of linear. The reason people shoot in log is because it gives you a lot more flexibility in editing. So your footage looks like this out of camera. It's not really usable on its own, but then you convert it to Rec 709, and now it looks like a regular video file, but you have all of this extra room for flexibility, for bringing your highlights down, bringing your shadows up. So it gives you a lot more dynamic range. This is why it's the choice for professionals. So Canon has two log options. It has C-Log 2 and C-Log 3. Now, C-Log 2 is usually reserved for their cinema cameras. It's a bit flatter, which means it's a little bit higher dynamic range, meaning it captures more information in the highlights and the shadows at the same time. So C-Log 3 is what this is right now. This is on my R6 Mark II. This can only do C-Log 3 like most of Canon's hybrid cameras. C-Log 3 is still great, but we have the option for C-Log 2, which is pretty cool. And that's what I'm going to be using because theoretically, it should be giving us some more dynamic range to work with. All right, that was a lot. Hopefully that made sense and you understand, at least in practical terms, what certain settings are doing for you. Here are my recommendations for a couple different scenarios. I'm going to be using C-Log 2 for the color profile on all of these. The first scenario is YouTube videos and small projects. This will be honestly the most commonly applicable setup, I think, for a lot of people watching this. For video format, I'm going for XF-HEVC-S YCC 422 10-bit, which is going to give us a lot of colors to work with and a lot of flexibility. I'm going with 4KU non-fine because I want that standard 16:9 aspect ratio, and for something like YouTube, I don't need 8K oversampling. Frame rate will be 23.98p. This gives us the most natural feeling motion blur. You can kind of see when I move my hand like this, it's got a little blur to it. To simulate this, if I cranked up my shutter speed to 1/320th of a second, just to simulate this, now look at how jittery this looks. That looks weird, right? So for natural motion blur, 23.98p, unless you're slowing it down. And the only compression option we have here is long GOP, so we're gonna go with that. So this gives us a video file that still has a lot of color flexibility and a good amount of dynamic range, but it's gonna be a much smaller file size, saving us a lot of space, with the main drawback being it will be a little bit hard for a computer to process in editing, so you'll probably have to make proxies. All right, and scenario 2 is a large important project, maybe like a commercial client project, for example. Here we wanna prioritize the best possible quality and editing flexibility without really too much concern for how much storage we're going to be using. For recording format, I'll be choosing XF-AVC-S at 422 10-bit. This is going to give us larger file sizes with better playback. For recording size, I'm going to go with 4KU fine. So now we're oversampling from 8K, giving us a bit of a sharper image. Now this does limit us to 24 and 30 frames per second, but I'm fine with that because I'm going with 24 anyways. And then I'm going to choose standard intro compression, which is just going to give us that a little bit of higher quality file sizes. For comparison, our Scenario 2 here gives us a bitrate of 360 megabits per second, or about 3 hours of recording time on my 512 gigabyte memory card, whereas the previous setup for like a YouTube video, that gave us a bitrate of 135 megabits per second, or a total of 8 hours of recording time on this 512 gigabyte card. If I choose Scenario 2 here, then that's going to eat up my entire memory card just for a couple YouTube videos. I'm not interested in that, so that's why I'm going to be shooting in the option 1 that I gave you for most of my projects. Now, these are the two main options I'd go for. If you want to shoot RAW, you don't really have a lot of options here. You're basically either choosing 8K or 4K RAW, and you can choose between full RAW and compressed RAW. But in 8K RAW, I only get 24 minutes of recording time on this 512 gigabyte memory card. So that's not something that's really feasible for me right now. Although this is not sponsored, but OWC just did send me 2 1 terabyte CF Express Type B cards for my R5 Mark II. So that might change soon. I might be able to do a little more 8K, but realistically, there's not many scenarios where I need 8K. And then the other mode I didn't really talk about is any of the 8-bit settings. I don't really recommend 8-bit if you're getting into professional work, which you probably are if you're shooting on the R5 Mark II, because you're just losing out on a lot of that editing flexibility. There's no real penalty to shooting in 10-bit other than a slightly larger file size. So I say go for 10-bit no matter what. If you're shooting on a camera like this, you're gonna want 10-bit. I know that was a lot of info to dump on you, but I hope that makes sense. I hope this helped you with your camera settings, because it is a little bit confusing, especially if it's just not something you've really touched before. I feel like every time I talk about a topic like this, there's people more get into this technical side of things that comment that I explained something wrong. If I did say something wrong, I apologize. I try to research and make sure that I understand everything I'm talking about in videos before I do. A lot of the time what happens is I'm just not going into the nuances of a lot of these really technical settings, because my kind of idea of providing value to you guys is that I want to explain it enough that you understand how something is going to affect you when you're actually out in the world shooting, and you can make an informed decision on what settings to change, because even though maybe you don't understand the entire technical process that's happening behind the scenes, you at least understand how it's going to affect your final product. So hopefully, if you didn't know any of this stuff, now you can pick up your R5 Mark II, or a lot of these settings even transfer to the R5 Mark I. Hopefully you can pick that up and shoot some video with a little more confidence now and get some really great colors and video quality and dynamic range and all those things out of your camera. That's all I got for you in this one though. Thank you guys for watching. I did a couple other videos on the R5 Mark II. You can check those out as well if you're curious. But that's it. I'll see you in the next one.